Hello and welcome back everyone to our YouTube channel, Bleak Archives. Today we're absolutely thrilled to dive into one of our favorite fantasy worlds, which is of course the magical land of Narnia. Now I personally have been a massive Chronicles of Narnia fan for years, and let me tell you, there are some absolutely wild misconceptions floating around the internet about C.S. Lewis's masterpiece that just need to be addressed. I'm going to be your myth-busting guide as we explore the 10 most persistent and frankly ridiculous myths about Narnia that fans keep spreading. Trust me, some of these are gonna blow your mind, and others might actually make you question everything you thought you knew about Aslan's kingdom. Every myth in this video is either going to make you love Narnia, or it's going to be the reason you can never read the books in the same way again. So make sure you grab your Turkish delight and get ready to step through that wardrobe with me and the Bleak Archives family, and let's separate fact from fiction in the world of Narnia once and for all. But before we start the video, we'd like to give you a quick reminder to click the like button, smash the subscribe button, and ring the bell icon so that you never miss out on another video like this ever again. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Myth number 1. The Chronicles of Narnia are strict Christian allegory. Alright, let's kick things off with the big one. The myth that is absolutely insane. People constantly refer to Narnia as Christian allegory, and while I totally understand where this comes from, Lewis himself would have completely disagreed with this characterization. Lewis was incredibly specific about this. He called Narnia a supposal, not an allegory. What's the massive difference? An allegory is a one-to-one representation where every single element directly corresponds to something else. Lewis wasn't trying to retell the Christian story in fantasy terms, but was rather asking, what if Christ appeared in another world as a lion? The key difference that everyone misses is that Aslan isn't just representing Jesus, he literally is the same divine being appearing in a different world. In Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Aslan tells the children, "But there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. This was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there." This isn't allegorical language. It's stating that Aslan and Jesus are literally the same being. Lewis even explained this in his letters, writing that if Aslan represented the immaterial deity, he would be an allegorical figure. But in reality, however, he is an invention giving an imaginary answer to the question, what might Christ become like if there really were a world like Narnia and he chose to be incarnate and die and rise again in that world as he actually has done in ours? This is not an allegory at all. So while Narnia certainly contains Christian themes and theology, calling it a strict allegory fundamentally misunderstands what Lewis was actually trying to accomplish.
Beautiful.
Myth number 2. Susan is permanently damned because she likes nylons and lipstick. This myth is absurd. The problem of Susan has been debated forever, with critics like J.K. Rowling claiming that Susan is lost to Narnia because she becomes interested in lipstick. She's become irreligious basically because she found mature relationships. Here's what actually happens that everyone seems to conveniently ignore. Susan doesn't appear in the last battle not because she's permanently damned, but because she's actively chosen to stop believing in Narnia. She's dismissed her adventures there as funny games we used to play when we were children, and is more interested in being grown up than remembering the magic. But here's the crucial part that myth believers always ignore. Susan didn't die in the train crash. While her siblings and friends are killed and transported to the real Narnia, Susan is still alive on Earth. Lewis himself addressed this directly in a 1960 letter to a reader, essentially saying that Susan's story isn't over and that there's nothing preventing her from eventually finding her way back to Narnia. Moreover, Lewis wasn't condemning female sexuality. He was criticizing the vanity and superficiality that makes someone reject wonder and magic. In fact, we could say that Susan's obsession with nylons and lipstick parallels Lewis's own adolescent vanity. Myth number 3. The books should be read in chronological order. One of the most well-known debates in this fandom is the myth that you should read the books in chronological order, starting with The Magician's Nephew. This actually undermines the entire experience Lewis intended. Lewis wrote and published the books in a specific order for very good reasons. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was meant to be your entry point into Narnia, not The Magician's Nephew. When you start with The Magician's Nephew, you're getting backstory before you understand what that backstory is explaining. Think about it. The lamppost in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is mysterious and intriguing when Lucy first encounters it. But if you've already read The Magician's Nephew, you know exactly where it came from and why it's there. You've killed the mystery and wonder that Lewis carefully crafted. Lewis himself never suggested reading them chronologically. The chronological numbering was added by publishers after his death, and it fundamentally changes the reading experience from discovery to mere chronological documentation. The original publication order creates the sense of exploring and gradually understanding this world, rather than having everything explained up front. Myth number 4. The Planet Narnia theory is canon. Michael Ward's Planet Narnia theory suggests that Lewis intentionally structured each of the 7 chronicles around the 7 medieval planets: Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Luna, Mercury, Venus, and Saturn. Ward argues that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is jovial like Jupiter, Prince Caspian is martial like Mars, the Silver Chair is lunar, and so on. It's an incredibly detailed and scholarly theory that's genuinely compelling to read about. But here's the thing. It's still just a theory, not an established fact. Ward himself admits there's no external evidence that Lewis consciously planned this structure. Lewis never mentioned it in any letters, interviews, or personal writings. The theory is based entirely on finding planetary imagery and themes within the completed books. While the theory is intellectually fascinating and may reveal subconscious patterns in Lewis's imagination, treating it as definitive canon goes way beyond what the evidence actually supports. It's literary analysis, not authorial intent, and we need to be clear about that distinction. Myth number 5. Narnia has a completely inconsistent timeline. Many people have been claiming that Narnia's timeline makes no sense and that Lewis just randomly threw numbers around. This is honestly very infuriating for avid readers and lovers of this series because Lewis actually put a lot of thought into the chronology, even if it's not immediately obvious. The key thing everyone misses is that time moves at different rates between Earth and Narnia, and this rate isn't constant. When the Pevensies first enter Narnia, they discover that hundreds of Narnian years have passed since its creation. When they return in Prince Caspian, over 1,000 Narnian years have passed during just one Earth year. This is not what you call inconsistency. It's intentional world building that reflects the magical nature of the world itself. Lewis understood that a secondary world doesn't need to follow our physical laws, and the fluid relationship between Earth time and Narnia time actually enhances the sense of wonder and otherworldliness. The timeline makes perfect sense when you track it properly. Narnia exists for about 2,555 years total, spanning from its creation in The Magician's Nephew to its ending in The Last Battle, while only 49 years pass on Earth. Myth number 6. Lewis borrowed heavily from Tolkien's Middle-earth. This myth really gets under my skin because it misunderstands both authors' creative processes and sources. People keep claiming Lewis was just copying Tolkien, usually pointing at creatures or world-building vibes. The reality is that both writers drew from the same deep well of myth and fairy tale that predates them by centuries. Lewis's fauns, centaurs, naiads, and dryads come straight out of Greco-Roman tradition and British fairy lore. His talking beasts trace to centuries of fable and nursery tale, not to orcs and ents. Yes, Lewis and Tolkien were inklings and they challenged one another, but their methods diverged wildly. Tolkien built a philological legendarium from the ground up, languages first, Myths second, story third. As he was obsessed with internal historicity, Lewis was intentionally syncretic. He mixed classical and northern myth with chivalric romance and Christian theology, then set it all inside a children's fairy tale frame. Calling that copying erases what Lewis himself called a supposal. Suppose the Christ figure came into a world like Narnia. What then? He wanted readers to recognize old myths so the echoes could do theological work. Influence ran both ways between friends, but derivation? That's the myth. The creative DNA is shared ancestry, not imitation. Myth number 7. The White Witch and the Queen of Charn are different characters. Here's a myth that comes from not reading closely or only watching the movies. I've seen countless threads treat Jadis, the White Witch, and the Queen of Charn as two separate people when they're literally the same character. The magician's nephew spells it out. Jadis is the last Queen of Charn, the one who destroyed her world by speaking the deplorable word, then blundered into our London and finally into newborn Narnia. That's her origin, and it's why her winter feels like an invasion, not a native season. So where does the confusion come from? Publication order. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe arrived first, so readers met the witch years before her backstory existed in print. By the time the prequel filled in the blanks, some fans were already attached to headcanon. One more important nuance. In LWW, Mr. Beaver repeats an in-world rumor that the witch is descended from Lilith and is one of the Jinn. But that's character chatter, not authorial genealogy. The later book overrides the gossip with clear canon. Jadis is of Charn. One character, one through line, spanning worlds. And her evil isn't mystery fog, it's history you can trace. Myth number 8. Aslan only appears in Narnia. This is a subtle but crucial miss because it blunts Lewis's central move. People assume Aslan is confined to Narnia and vanishes at the wardrobe's edge. In Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Aslan explicitly tells Edmund and Lucy he exists in our world by another name, and that their task is to learn to know him there. In that same scene, he appears as a lamb before flashing into the lion, which already breaks the only a lion assumption. And in The Horse and His Boy, which is set entirely within the Narnian world of Calormen, the desert, and Archenland, Aslan meets Shasta multiple times in different guises, including as the silent cat who watches over him and as the lion who drives off jackals. Those appearances aren't in our Earth, but they prove the other half of the myth wrong. Aslan is not locked to a single form. Put both books together and the picture is clear. The supposal is universal. The same divine reality appears across worlds in the forms we can bear, and he tells the children outright that he has another name here. Reducing him to just a Narnian lion misses the whole point. Myth number 9. The series has no overarching plot structure. I hear this a lot, usually from folks expecting a modern, single-arc fantasy trilogy with one cast marching straight through. That's not the shape Lewis chose. He didn't set out to write one continuous epic. He built a myth cycle for children, 7 distinct tales that together cover an entire sacred history, starting from creation to consummation, with repeating symbols, promises, and reckonings. The structure is more cathedral than corridor. The Magician's Nephew gives you the creation and the rules that undergird everything. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the great invasion and restoration tale that crowns the Pevensies. Prince Caspian is a restoration of old Narnia after centuries of suppression. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is a sea pilgrimage that tests virtues and vices at the edges of the world. The Silver Chair is an underworld rescue that presses courage and hope under the earth. The Horse and His Boy is a Golden Age side story of identity, providence, and calling that broadens the map beyond the northern forests. The Last Battle brings the long history to its judgment, revealing why oaths, mercy, and truth-telling mattered all along. That's not randomness, that's deliberate design. Expect a tight TV miniseries, and the books will feel episodic. Read them as a full mythic cycle, creation to last judgment, and the spine clicks into place. Myth number 10. Lewis made major errors in his world building. The final myth I want to tackle is the persistent claim that Lewis was careless about consistency and made major errors in his world building that reveal sloppy writing. This criticism usually focuses on things like the timeline, geography, or character details. Most of these supposed errors disappear when you read the books carefully and understand Lewis's intentions. For example, people complain about the changing geography between books, but Narnia is explicitly described as a world where geography can change over time due to its magical nature. The timeline inconsistencies I mentioned earlier aren't errors. They're deliberate features of a world where time itself works differently. The supposed contradictions in character details usually come from people misremembering movie versions or not reading closely enough. Lewis was actually remarkably consistent for someone who claimed he wasn't trying to create a detailed secondary world like Tolkien. When apparent inconsistencies do exist, they're usually minor details that don't affect the story's integrity or meaning. The myth of Lewis as a careless world builder really comes from people expecting Tolkien-level detail and consistency from an author who had completely different goals and methods. Lewis was primarily interested in the spiritual and mythological dimensions of his stories, not in creating an exhaustively detailed fantasy world. Verdict. There you have it, 10 of the most persistent and annoying myths about the Chronicles of Narnia. Thoroughly debunked. The fascinating thing about these myths is how they often say more about modern readers' expectations and biases than they do about Lewis's actual writing. Many of these myths come from people trying to fit Narnia into modern categories, demanding it be either pure allegory or pure fantasy, expecting Tolkien-style consistency, or applying contemporary social criticism without understanding Lewis's historical context and intentions. The truth is that Lewis created something genuinely unique, a mythological cycle that blends Christian theology with classical mythology, fairy tale traditions, and modern fantasy. It doesn't fit neatly into any single category, and that's exactly what makes it so powerful and enduring. I hope this deep dive has helped you appreciate these incredible stories on their own terms, rather than through the lens of persistent myths and misconceptions. Let me know in the comments which of these myths surprised you the most, or if there are other Narnia myths you'd like me to tackle in a future video.